So I'm exhausted. As I was writing this, my 2-year-old is yelling, "Daddy, Mama!" What does she need? I'm not sure. My wife was on that one. You see, we'd been playing Encanto on loop all morning for her since her daycare had been closed since the 20th. Is that too much screen time? I don't know. I turn around and I can see that she threw all of my 6-year-old schoolwork on the freshly cleaned floor. And then I realized I forgot to turn the dishwasher on last night after filling it. And now the dishes are piling up in the sink. And if I want them to be clean, I'm going to have to wash them by hand. We were preparing for the storm, so thankful that it was on a weekend because the kids would be home anyways. And it wouldn't be another day that we'd have to figure out how to work and do childcare at the same time. That morning, I woke up at 2 and couldn't get back to sleep, which means I'll probably pass out at 7 p.m. again. My 2-year-old has been in daycare all of 3 days this entire month between holidays and closures due to COVID. This month, my family also dealt with the 4-year anniversary of my father-in-law's death by suicide. I dealt with a pinched nerve in my neck that caused my right arm to go numb, and of course, I'm right-handed. And the church was almost continually closed during the week, so I couldn't work for it, even though my kid was home, due to a movie being filmed that had been delayed multiple times due to COVID, inconveniencing our renters and making a couple of people mad. Although I assure you everything's fine now. My family has dealt with the pushing back of the timeline of our adoption case by 3 months, again, due to COVID, which means more time before we can do things like visit my parents in Canada, though who knows if we could anyways. And before the pandemic, I also struggled with chronic pain, which I talked about last week, and generalized anxiety disorder, something that I take medication for. Sometimes my heart still beats, though, like a hammer in my chest when I get anxious about my kids or a conflict or a global pandemic. But here's the thing. Things really aren't so bad, right? I have it easy, really. I don't have COVID. Nobody in my family does. Well, except I just found out my mother-in-law does. Nobody close to me has died since 2020. I don't have to worry about seeing the anti-vaxxers in my family over the holidays because the only family that were anti-vaxxers lived all the way in British Columbia, Canada, and I can't cross the border. And for the record, it's not my parents. My wife, Amy, works part-time, which means she can care for our littlest one when daycare is closed most of the time. And my job, which I'm blessed to have, is flexible enough in hours that I can pick up the slack. Our 6-year-old is vaccinated and in school, and I already have a therapist and anti-anxiety medication from before the pandemic. And I mean, I have a job, for God's sake, a job that I love, even when I have to do it on Zoom, as exhausting as Zoom is. And even if it's not reliable, our 2-year-old actually does have childcare. And while we're talking about that, I only have 2 kids. And what about those with 3 or 4 or more, or single parents, or people who can't move their work around? How are people managing to care for their unvaccinated little ones? My family is financially stable, and I know that this isn't the case for everyone. Never before have I had more requests for the minister's discretionary fund. That's the fund that we have to help pay people pay for expenses like heating bills and food and rent. Never before have I had more requests to that fund than now, these past 2 months, in my entire 5 years of ministry here. People are really struggling right now. So I have no right to complain. Why do I feel so tired, so exhausted, so burnt out, so blunted, so dull all the time? I have no right to complain. Friends, I want to know, have you said something like this? Have you wondered something like this? You see, almost everyone I've talked to lately feels like this to some degree. I shouldn't feel bad because people have it worse than me. I've heard this in pastoral meetings and from friends, from colleagues, and from family. The pandemic has become our new normal. So why is it that almost everyone I talk to feels this utter lack of energy? Like we are seeing through a glass darkly, like we are pushing a rock up a never-ending hill, like whatever is happening outside our immediate world is almost impossible to process. Where getting dressed can seem pointless, and time has no meaning, and meaning feels hard to find or make, that our values feel like they are there, but they are taking a back seat to this collective brain fog. The problem is that all of us could very easily point to someone who has more trouble in this pandemic, who has more challenges, more heartbreak, more reason to be exhausted. And so we are using that to tell ourselves that our feelings aren't valid, that we shouldn't be having a hard time. We are, in effect, many of us, shaming ourselves for feeling the way we do. But friends, if you feel this way, and I understand that not everyone does, but if you do, I want you to know that it's okay. You are allowed to feel sad, mad, scared about it. And here's the truth. Even if you push it down, your body will feel it. Like we talked about last week, body and mind are not separate. So what are we collectively feeling? Adam Grant wrote last April in a New York Times article about this phenomenon that so many of us are experiencing. It was an article titled, "There's a name for the blah you're feeling. It's called languishing." He wrote, "At first, I didn't recognize the symptoms that we all had in common. Friends mentioned that they were having trouble concentrating. Colleagues reported that even with vaccines on the horizon, they weren't excited about 2021. A family member was staying up late to watch National Treasure, even though she knows the movie by heart. And instead of bouncing out of bed at 6 a.m., I was lying there until 7, playing words with friends. It wasn't burnout. We still had energy. It wasn't depression. We didn't feel hopeless. We just felt somewhat joyless and aimless. It turns out there's a name for this: languishing. Languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels as if you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield. And it might be the dominant emotion of 2021. So that was 10 months ago. And I'm wondering if it might also be the dominant emotion of 2022. I think we might still be languishing. Since Grant wrote these words, we had a summer that felt like maybe, just maybe, we were getting out of this thing. We had these beautiful weather. We could go outside and see people, be with our loved ones. We had 3 services outside in the church parking lot, only for the Delta variant to hit in August and Omicron to throw us for a loop just in time for the holidays. And so here we are, completely online, and even mostly so, even when it's not a snowstorm, like it's 2020 again. And the problem is, early on in 2020, we had all of this adrenaline pushing us. 70 computers logged on to our first online service. 70. That's 3 times what we have right now. Because we knew we needed community. But slowly, this became our normal routine. Zoom stopped feeding us. And with no end in sight to this collective trauma of living through a pandemic, living through a global pandemic, unlike anything any of us have experienced before, we are dealing with the symptoms of being at this high alert, this high anxiety at all times. And we can't keep up with it. Our bodies are not designed to keep up with it. The stress of living through this pandemic is taking up a lot of our bandwidth because our bodies are trying to protect us, trying to keep us in survival mode. It's physically impossible to do all the things we used to and to do them well when our bodies are in such high alert all the time. Unitarian Universalist Association President Reverend Susan Frederick Gray wrote in an email to church leaders this week, "As the first months of 2022 draw to a close, I am sending you love and so much care. I never have experienced anything like this extended period of uncertainty, isolation, discouragement, loss, and heartbreak. I hear from so many corners how exhausted our religious professionals and leaders are. I hear about the constant planning and changing plans, the emotional toll of the difficult decisions we have been making for more than 2 years. We've been on high alert on so many levels for years now, trying to protect ourselves, our families and communities, trying to save lives from health, economic, and political calamity. The other thing that I know is that virtually none of us are at our best. This is hard as leaders when we held so many responsibilities and have to navigate so many expectations. It's also hard when we minister to communities of people who are also struggling. Incidents of people acting terribly seem to be everywhere. And I send you grace and care as I know too many of you are on the receiving end. And I pray for all of us to feel that deep compassion and loving kindness that is present to us and a part of us. And so I want to say before I move on, this is me talking again, that you all aren't acting terribly. And that's not my point in sharing this. You all are amazing, even in the face of this exhausting and isolating time. But I want to be clear that a lot of what Reverend Susan says applies to all of us, church leaders or not. And I also know that many of you are burnt out, languishing. And sometimes it's all you can do to show up in your pajamas at church, which I'll remind you is part of our agreement for folks who become members. One of our promises to and from new members is we look forward to building with you a congregation that is real, meaning we make room for folks who can't follow through, who don't show up, who haven't stepped through our doors yet. A congregation where if it's all you can do to get out of bed in the morning, then you come in your pajamas. Can you help us in creating a congregation that is real? So right now, this is many of us. And so here I am in my pajamas to show you that this is a struggle. And by the way, you can come in your pajamas in person too. And I encourage you to do so if it's all you can do. One of the most important things that we can remember and do for ourselves and for each other is to remember that we are not alone. That this feeling, this languishing that you may feel, this burnout perhaps, is completely normal, a normal response to what we're going through. And you might struggle to hear that message because you aren't depressed, or you are still functioning enough to do a job perhaps, or to care for your kids or yourself. And others have it so much worse, but you aren't exactly thriving either. And that is what languishing is. It's finding it hard to get excited about anything, but making it through okay. Now I want to pause here because I know it's also important to consider the fact that for some of us, languishing has become something more. It's no secret that the pandemic has had an effect on everyone. And as we reach this 2-year anniversary of the shutdown, and even more than that since the pandemic began, remember the 19 in COVID-19 refers to 2019, when the virus was first discovered. After 2 years of living through this anxiety about getting sick, the fear that caused us to stay home, the isolation that comes from being separated, not seeing friends and family, not knowing when we will see them next, grieving death from COVID or not in unique and different ways, having to balance the realities of working from home, of school from home, of childcare being closed, the concerns about what feels safe for our kids and our parents, the concern about what feels safe for our own bodies, a longing to return to normal, yet a difficulty remembering what that actually was like. A general understanding that we are living in a moment that will impact us through the rest of our lives, that will be taught in history books, that has changed the way we work and live and play and even love. After 2 years of that, is it any wonder that rates of diagnosable mental illness have gone up? You see, this is something, of course, we've been dealing with since before the pandemic, and the pandemic has only increased this. In 2020, roughly 1 in 5 people struggled with some form of mental illness, which means that chances are you or someone you love was dealing with this. This number has risen to between 40 and 50% during the pandemic, depending on which study you look at. On top of that, access to mental health services, already hard to find when you are in a mental health crisis, have become near impossible. So I just want to remind you that if this is your reality, you are not alone, and please reach out to me because I can help you find those services. Reverend Susan from the Universalist Association, from the Unitarian Universalist Association, says you need to find joy. And she finds it in political gains that we can make to help others through things like You Do the Vote and the Side with Love campaign. And I know many of us can find that too. But I also know that social justice movements need to be about taking breath. You've probably heard this metaphor that if we are all singing one long note, putting that breath out when we can, and resting up while others take up the slack, right? So for some, in fact, one of the things I've read is that for some, helping others can be a way to help combat that burnout, that exhaustion. And I know that some in this congregation are really energized by that work. And to you, I am so grateful. But I also think it's important to remember, as our reading highlights today, sometimes it is better to receive than to give. Sometimes we need those moments to receive. Sometimes we need to take those moments of rest. And this is hard because we here at First Parish are about action and bringing out our love beyond walls. And that is something deeply important and part of who we are. And we're not getting rid of that. But sometimes we need to realize that what we can do isn't everything, not as much as we were able to before. And so I want to remind you that it is okay to make those choices right now, to prioritize the things that make you able to survive, even if it's not the right choices, the ones that you would make in the normal times. Perhaps maybe you let your house get messier than it would. Fine. Have a laundry basket for clean clothes and one for dirty ones. Fine. Use paper plates sometimes because you just can't keep up. Fine. Noticing that these are a lot about cleaning houses, which is a thing that I have a lot of stress around. You let your kids watch too much TV? Fine. You watch too much TV yourself? Fine. Whatever it is that you need to do to survive this, that is okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. These are extraordinary times. And even if they've gone on so long to feel ordinary, they are not ordinary. We are still in this high stress event. I also want to remind you that you can ask for help. You can ask for help from us here at the church, from me. No matter how much courage it takes, this is always something that you can do, and we are here to help you. And maybe if you're one of those people who doesn't need this message, you can be reminded that so many of us do, and we need the grace that you can offer us until we can offer it back to you. So I want to leave you with this. You are not alone. If all you can do is show up, know that your presence makes a difference to everyone here. You are not alone. If you feel like you have no right to complain, no right to feel overwhelmed or exhausted, I assure you that you do. No one is exempt from what's happening in our world right now. And if all you can do is play Wordle or watch TV and the pile of dishes is still there, you are okay. You are sacred and you are loved. May it be so, and amen. Amen.